book, Pandemic Disruptions and Odisha's Lessons in Governance. The book was launched last year by Honorable CM Odisha, Mr. Naveen Patnaik. We are here today to have a discussion around the book and see and cover all the sectors that Dr. Patnaik very vividly wrote about during the pandemic years. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Mrs. Renu Kaul Verma, MD, Vitasta Publication, and also would want to extend our warmest regards to her for being a part of this journey of the publication of Dr. Patnaik's book and being very, very patient with us through the whole process. Ma'am, I would want you to please come on the podium and share your thoughts of working with Dr. Patnaik on this book. Thank you, Jamila.
Uh, Kartikeya Sharma ji is not here. Oh, he's here. Namaskar. Uh, Shri Vivek Devaroy, Shri Arun Naira, Ms. Vandana Prasad, Rajesh Mahapatra, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Namaskar and a very good evening to you. 3 years ago, in this very month of March, we had our first experience of complete lockdown. Even today, I can feel that fear, the uncertainty. Everything seemed so unreal. On a personal note, I lost someone very dear to me, my mother in law, who passed away in April 2021. In fact, we all lost someone during those days. Not only did we have personal tragedies, the pandemic also exposed the strengths and weaknesses of our systems of governance and highlighted the importance of effective leadership and decision making. Today, I would like to believe that we are past the pandemic, but each time we let our guard down, the virus raises its ugly head. The cases are rising again, and the fear is back. What gives me hope is that even in those terrible times, there were people who were working hard to overcome the many challenges. People like Dr. Amar Patnaik and others who worked tirelessly to create some normalcy out of the chaos. The Odisha government's handling of the COVID crisis has been applauded nationally as well as globally. And it has given me great satisfaction to have been able to document Odisha's fight against COVID with this timely book. This book is an important contribution to the ongoing dialogue about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on governance policy. I hope that this session here will provide an opportunity for us to engage in a fruitful discussion about lessons learned from the pandemic and the path forward for governance and public policy. Thank you, Dr. Patnaik, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Renu ma'am, for these words. I would now like to call Dr. Patnaik on the podium, the man of the moment, a former career bureaucrat, a man who needs no introduction, a current member of parliament, a leader in every sense of the word, my mentor, Mr. Dr. Amar Patnaik.
First of all, a big, huge thanks to Jamila for such generous words. Nowadays, people don't speak generous words. Particularly coming from the parliament, there's no generous words extended to anyone. Thank you so much to everyone who is present here. Dr. Dev Roy, Mr. Arun Maira, Dr. Vandana Prasad, my colleague in the parliament in the Rajya Sabha, Kartikeya Sharma ji, other member colleagues who are from the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, A.D. Singh ji, and very revered member from the Lok Sabha who has been there with me in all many committees together we have worked. Is your ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, I see a lot of young crowd. Thank you so much for coming here. I'll be very brief because we'll be discussing about the book. This book was launched by Honorable CM on the 12th of October last year. Uh, I would just I'll make a brief introduction about how this came about because this is an anthology of essays that have been written during the pandemic years. During it actually started. I remember I was in a guest house because after reaching from Delhi, the last day the flight was, I think that was the last flight from Parliament. I think 25th or 26th of March of 2020. So I took that last flight, landed up and stayed in a guest house because my old parents were at home and everyone was scared that we shouldn't be going and staying with the parents. So I stayed in the guest house for about a month. So during that time, I started writing this. What was the experience? There was a huge hard lockdown everywhere in Bhubaneswar itself. Uh, it was changing. The hardness of the lockdown was changing from time to time. So during that period, it actually all started. Now, first it was the health crisis. Then it was a food distribution crisis. How food will reach people? First, migrants coming on food from different areas. Uh, the food has to reach the destitutes in the rural areas of Odisha itself. So it was a food crisis as well for some people. For some people, it was even a crisis of particularly for children, for women. It was a different kind of crisis because this had never happened before. In 100 years, this was the first. This was the first time after 100 years where you were facing a pandemic of this proportion. Then there was the issue of, which is another issue which is not being talked about at that time. But fortunately, I was a member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Data Protection that was set up at that time. So we were discussing the bill, and this issue really came up that if you identified someone as having COVID, whether you have to disclose his name or you're not disclose his name, what is more important? If that person doesn't disclose his name, what do you do? What is more important is right to privacy or right to life of a whole population of a state or a city this is also what I have written in this book. So this evolved. So my writing also evolved as the pandemic unfolded. Different sectors got involved. Different sectors were involved. Then there was a disaster in the form of amphan coming in. So a natural disaster had to be negotiated. So all this has been compiled together in this book. Writing had been there from before, but of course we have tried to make it. This book actually gives a view of what happened at that time, as dates have been mentioned, months have been mentioned. When months change, with every passing month, the response was becoming different from the government because the government was learning also at the same time. A huge thing which has come up in this book, which Odisha successfully negotiated this pandemic only because of its handling of the earlier natural disasters. It had very successfully handled the natural disasters. It used the same regime of governance, same regime of community resilience, building community resilience, first by having community buy-in through various narratives that was being delivered to them from time to time using television. That experience really helped, and this has been captured here. And this was well appreciated globally. And then when it came to vaccination, again, there were various issues involved. What is the rate? Who will come first? Who will come second? Will there be vaccine resistance, hesitancy to take the vaccine? So these aspects also have been covered. So this book is, even though the title says pandemic disruption, so it is not pandemic disruptions only in the area of health. Pandemic disruptions in the area of education, pandemic disruptions in the area of food distribution, pandemic disruptions in the area of giving under separate schemes benefits to pregnant mothers and children, to have child marriages going up, how it was negotiated, migrants coming in, how it was negotiated, then the vaccination drive came, but at the same time the economy has to go on. So what were the sectors that were kept open? How did Odisha supply oxygen to the rest of the country when the situation was demanded? Because thank you, sir. So this is all have been discussed in this book in different articles, and today I'm happy that the panel is here to discuss this book. The other aspect which is also covered in this book is a little bit of, since it's a compilation, I thought that I'll also give a little bit of a couple of articles relating to what was happening in the world. What was happening in the world was Afghanistan was seeing the peak of the turmoil. The women there after the Taliban took over were facing a different kind of problem suddenly. And even though there was a pandemic, the pandemic was global. It affected Afghanistan as well during the turmoil that was happening. So some of these articles are there. And the overall framework which was used in Odisha, which we call as the 5T framework. I have explained this in the book, but it is starting T is transparency, second one is teamwork, third one is technology. Another T is timeliness, leading to transformation. Now, this is the growth agenda that Odisha is following in all areas. The learning point came from the pandemic. We realized that there are issues relating to primary health, but then we just can't keep on cribbing about it, but something has to be done to transform the system. And this is what is being done. Something has to be done to transform the educational system, particularly primary education and children's access to mobile and smartphones, because education was getting affected very badly. So the book covers many of these issues where this particular framework has been used as a response, as an implementation response to the pandemic in various sectoral areas. So the lessons in governance are not just confined to health, but different sectors and different areas. As we discussed, I'm sure the honorable panelists have gone through the book. I know many suggestions will come from them. This is my first book, which I wrote, was an institutional, institutional asymmetry, power asymmetry, and in the context of rural India. This was by Palgrave Macmillan, Institutional Change and Power Asymmetry in the Context of Rural India. It's available in Amazon as well. So there it was a highly dense discussion of how things do not happen at the field level because of asymmetries. If I link these two books and think about the governance style, I realize that this book is actually an evidence of my theorization over there, that if you really want to change, bring about transformational change, then it has to be bottom up, it has to be in a way where there is community takes precedence. Community has the largest buy-in and therefore develops resilience. Why Odisha has been successful in disaster management and has been talked about everywhere from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. Wherever I've gone in parliamentary committees, when I went to Kashmir, people were asking me about the Odisha's handling of disaster management and our Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik. It is because going through several of those disasters, the community was empowered with knowledge, with practice, with experience, and with confidence to deal with it in a manner that they became resilient. And that is what was useful, extremely useful, while handling the pandemic, because that was the only model available. If you would remember, the Government of India is using the National Disaster Management Act to basically issue guidelines. So we were already expert in that, and our Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik took the lead in this. And some of these practices were followed by other states as well. So I'll rest my discussion about the book at this, and we will have the panel discuss the book, and at that point of time, we will address some of the other issues which have been mentioned in the book. Thank you so much for coming to the event. I am also having another discussion on the book on the 10th of April, tentatively at Bhubaneswar, where we will have it more in the local language. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for such a detailed intro into the discussion. It's my pleasure now to invite Mr. Rajesh Mahapatra, a business journalist, political analyst, public policy expert, newsroom leader, and editor, Press Trust of India. He's been moderating the discussion for today, sir. I welcome you on the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and congratulations once again, Amar Babu, for bringing this book out. I think, a lot of bad things happen during the pandemic, but a lot of good things also happen during the pandemic. One of the good things that the pandemic did, it left people with a lot of time to think and be creative. And I think in the foreword, Mr. Jairam Ramesh very aptly says that in these 2 years, through his writings, uh, Dr. Amar Patnaik really emerged as a thought leader. And then there are disciplined career bureaucrats turned politicians, and then there are lazy journalists like me. He wrote and he put all those books. He created a theme, he created a thread, and he came out with a book. We just write and we forget about it. So, congratulations once again. And the second thing that I just wanted to comment that this book kind of covers a very wide canvas. You talk about technology, you talk about data protection, you talk about environment, you talk about health care, you talk about economy, you touch upon a very important subject of the time, which is federal relations. And I think it's just, you know, in fitness of things that we have had the panel today that we have, so that all of these we have actually experts who can touch upon each of these dimensions, who can do justice to each of these dimensions. Without much ado, let me start inviting the panel of experts. Let me begin with Professor Vivek Debroy to come to the stage. He needs no introduction. Long distinguished career as economist, policymaker, and planner. Dr. Debroy was a member of the NITI Aayog, and now he heads the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Debroy. May I now ask Dr. Vandana Prasad to come to the stage. Dr. Vandana Prasad has been a community pediatrician and a public health professional. She is better known for the role that she has played over the last 2 decades in building the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, which kind of argues for a robust public healthcare system. It has been my good fortune that during the pandemic, I was not that lazy. I also did a few things, and I did set up a small think tank in Odisha, and I benefited tremendously from Dr. Vandana Prasad's engagement in those forums where a lot of webinars we held tracking the pandemic situation in Odisha. And she's probably somebody who, there are very few people who were as intensely engaged from outside Odisha with the pandemic in Odisha. Dr. Vandana Prasad. May I request Mr. Arun Maira to come to the stage? Once again, Mr. Maira also needs no introduction, a former member of Planning Commission, who spearheaded the Boston Consulting Group in India. He's been a policymaker, planner, thinker, and he's associated with a host of institutions. And more importantly, he's also here today for the intensity and of engagement that he had with particularly Amar Babu's writings and what was happening during the pandemic. Dr. Maira. Last but not the least, the youngest member of the panel, Mr. Kartikeya Sharma. Kartikeya is a media baron at a very young age. He heads a group of news publications that includes the popular NewsX channel, India News, Rajya Samaj, and several other regional channels. He is, his name to fame is that he defeated Ademakan, right? So humble Ademakan in an intensely fought elections to the Rajya Sabha. Okay, so Mr. Sarma. Okay, we are going to. Dr. Debroy has to leave at 7, so I'm trying to. We'll essentially get the panel of experts to go through 3 rounds. So I'm trying to somehow get Dr. Debroy to stay on for the second round. So I'll start with him. The first round, we're just going to collect the initial thoughts of each of our panelists, and then we will, in the subsequent rounds, we will go into more details, specific details thematic details. Professor Debroi, why don't you want to come here?
Yes, and
Yeah, I know. I just like a teacher, you always like to stand
no,
and
that is
speak.
what I want to hang on to this. For a reason I will tell you in a minute. Well, Dr. Patnaik, thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to read this book and for having invited me to be part of this panel. I have which you are not aware of, which is that people invite me as a panelist to one of their book launches, and because of what I say, they do not invite me to any subsequent book launches. Which is why I am hanging on to this, because I suspect I will not get one in the future. COVID. As was mentioned initially, all of us went through difficult times during COVID. Some of us were individually infected. Almost all of us lost near ones, dear ones. It was a very traumatic experience during the second phase in particular. There are many kinds of dire prognosis. Millions would die in India. India would never be able to develop its vaccine. India would never be able to vaccinate its population, so on and so forth. All of that, in retrospect, has been proved wrong. And particularly if you normalize for population, India has done remarkably well. Health is completely a state subject. Under the Epidemic Diseases Act, the Union government has limited powers except what is done at the border. So the fact that we were successful, whether it's in terms of handling the exogenous shock of COVID, or whether it's in terms of handling the lockdown and the subsequent economic recovery, that's a function of what states have done. There have been books written about how India handled COVID. In the collection edited by P.K. Mishra and N.K. Singh, there is an essay by P.K. Mishra. There is the book by Gandhi Modi called A Nation to Protect. And of course, there is that remarkable story of Dharavi. But to the best of my knowledge, other than the Dharavi one, this is the only one that is focused on a state. The first one, at least, I think that's focused on a state. The title is slightly misleading, by the way, because as Dr. Patnaik himself said, it is not just only about pandemic. Probably the publisher chose that title because COVID sells everywhere. There is much more as revealed in the subtitle. Why did I say, Dr. Patnaik, you will regret it? Two reasons. Firstly, I think the publisher has been very, very sloppy. Every publisher does a decent job of copy editing, as I'm sure you've experienced with Macmillan. You've yourself done a PhD which has been published in the form of a book. You do not have references in the text which you do not find any mention in the book anywhere. So I see Bhandari et al. 2010, and I have no idea what Bhandari et al. 2010 means. There is no bibliography. There is no reference to Bhandari at all. Anyway, Azim Premji study. I find no reference to it anywhere. So basic editorial requirements have not been done. Dr. Patnaik, if I may say so, and I have the liberty of saying so because I'm standing here, this is a very lazy book. And what I mean by that is a collection of essays is a lazy way of writing. Many of us have fallen temptation to this. And by the way, I have read the book. Quite often there are people who write forwards and blurbs without reading the book. I have read the book, as I will demonstrate to you in a minute. You're capable of writing a much better book. Let me give some examples. Out-of-pocket expenditure. Bhandari et al. Reference here, 2010. I happen to know the reference. This is a paper that was published by Lavish Bhandari, who actually writes with me in Economic and Political Weekly in the year 2010. Data for 2004-2005, the 60th round of the NSS. If I'm going to write a book and I expect to be taken seriously, I can do better than that. In the year 2023 or in a book published in 2022, I can do better than citing data from 2004-2005. There have been plenty of studies. Azim Premji. A lot has been written about what COVID did in terms of people dropping below the poverty line, what it did in terms of income inequality. A lot of people have written about it. Some of this comes out in the National Family Health Survey, the 5th round, half of which happened right in the middle of pandemic. Is there any reference to that in this? No. The UNDP recently brought out a multi-dimensional poverty index where it said 415 million people in India in the last couple of decades, in the last 15 years or so, have risen above the poverty line. The World Bank estimates that purely because of COVID, around 50 million people in India may have dropped below the poverty line. Yet what do I have? I have a Azim Premji study. No harm quoting the Azim Premji study. But as any researcher, and you are one, would do, would be also to tell the reader that the Azim Premji study was only for 1 quarter. And I can certainly not generalize on the effect of a COVID pandemic. Was only for 1 quarter and was administered to exactly 2,778 respondents. On that, should I generalize about India? I certainly should not. Now, instances like those, and I can multiply them. The problem is this book, apart from what I said about a collection, I think not being published in this form, it needed serious updating. The decriminalization part of it, it's already happened. So it should no longer say the finance minister had promised it, it's happened. Vaccine distribution, is that an issue anymore? Maybe it is, maybe it is not. So I would say that this needed serious updating, referencing, stylistic improvements, which any young researcher would have done. There are serious issues which reflect your thoughts, which get diluted because of this kind of criticism that is likely to happen, to what should have been a much more serious and a more academically rigorous book even if the style is popular. Like, for example, what should we do about health? What should we do about union state fiscal relations? What should we do even about the seventh schedule, which is a legacy of the Government of India Act of 1935? Now, these are things you have debated about. These are things you have thought about. All of these, I think, needed to be spelled out much more. And I think this book should have been redone completely. Hence, my submission to you, please write another book. Please invite me as a panelist. You give me the book or you don't give me the book. Thank you very much.
You give us some more time, no?
We are not asking you to leave.
No, I am asking myself to leave. It will be easier to get out.
Right. No, I think all that was said, and knowing Dr. Amar Patnaik, we've all taken up as constructive criticism and incorporated hoping that if a revised version of the book has to come forward. We'll talk a bit more about it later.
I'll respond to this.
Yeah, we will talk about it. May I now go over to Dr. Vandana Prasad and seek her initial thoughts.
Firstly, Rajesh, thank you so much for inviting me to this very erudite and very influential panel. I'm really, I'm not sure that I belong here because neither influential nor eminent in the way that the rest of the panel is, but thank you so much. It provided the opportunity to read this book to some extent, not fully page to page. And it's a pleasure to be here because Odisha means a lot to me. I've been working in the south of Odisha for about 5 years now, quite intensely with the Department of the Tribal Department as well as Women and Child Development. And I hold Odisha very dear. I think there's a lot the world, the country most certainly, and the world at large can learn from Odisha. And perhaps there will be other, arenas to talk about that. But just before I start about the book, I think it's very important to say from what standpoint I'm viewing the book now. I mean, I'm not looking at the book even as a book. I'm not looking at the book written by a researcher or an academic. I teach epidemiology these days, but I'm not looking at it from the point of view of the rigor of the book as an academic piece. I'm seeing this as somebody, a member of the more or less ordinary citizenry of this country that does not, I don't occupy the corridors of power except when sometimes asked for advice and where sometimes spaces, emerge for experts and activists and workers like myself to engage with the government. We are getting a sense of what is happening in the as I said, the corridors of power in decision-making bodies in the parliament from the outside. And for us, for me, therefore, somebody very engaged with this country, with public policy in this country, with public health policy in this country, from the outside, looking on from the outside, this book has been extremely refreshing. I'm in the unusual situation of defending something because I'm usually critiquing. That's my job as an activist on the outside to critique. We critique all governments, all public health work because we think there's so far to go and somebody has got to do it. So we help where we can. And we always do critique when we need to. So I do want to say a few things about the tone of the book, therefore. It's refreshing because, in a context where it's become very difficult to speak the truth, except in the most cautious of terms. It is a positive book, but it still says things that needs to be said. I think that there is some degree of speaking of truth to power, which from a politician, an engaged politician, an analytical piece of work, regardless of whether, factually, which data should have been used, what research, what year of evidence, and so on and so forth, an analytical piece of work, fairly eclectic in its range, from a politician. Now, we're not seeing that kind of, we're not seeing this kind of language on the outside. We really are not. We're not seeing people who are producing thoughtful pieces, whether they may be wrong. I mean, they will engage with experts and experts will tell them that they were wrong on a certain count or not. But I think the point is more, is the discourse thoughtful, analytical, attempting to really come to grips and terms with what's going on in a deep sense. That itself is meaningful to me from the outside. To see politicians like that is important, is meaningful. Politicians who will say good things about their own governments or their own spaces and their own policies and their own programs, but equally do not hesitate, do not hold back from mentioning the challenges and the problems that still continue to exist. That's something that's become rare. It's rare. You may not feel that from the inside because there's so much debate happening amongst you. But for the polity outside, we're not seeing this. We're seeing as though it's not possible anymore to really engage analytically with any situation without feeling extremely anxious about what the repercussions of that might be. So I think from that point of view, it's been a refreshing book. Like I said, I feel that it has a progressive tone, it has an analytical tone, and it doesn't hold back from many of the more difficult challenges and problems that still exist. I specifically read, of course, the public health and the first three chapters because it was public health, it was children. I'm a child rights person. I briefly occupied some place in the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights as a member. I also read the piece about the lessons to be learned from Odisha. So the one thing that I would like to congratulate the author on is that I think the approach in the public health piece it's almost written like a public health person. Okay, there may be problems with the evidence and the referencing and so on and so forth. And I think that point should be taken. I think that the producers and the editors do need to be careful about that. But Amarji is he's not a researcher. I mean, for me, he's a politician. He's a policymaker in this country. That's how I'm looking at this book. So definitely the public health piece, what were the things that I noted were different from the kind of discourse that we're hearing just now. It has a systems approach, which is really very important, I think, to this country to continue to speak with the systems approach rather than a very individualized understanding of public health that's coming about in terms of, individual responsibility, individual duty, but not really looking at system strengthening in the way that the country really should be. I mean, we're not doing it. We're not investing. We are not nowhere near the 2.5% that every party, not just the one in power today, but every single party has promised. Nowhere near that, nowhere near the 5% that WHO demands, and so on and so forth. There's no getting away from that lack of systems investment. So that's one part. And on the other hand, what is very important to Odisha, the focus on the community mobilization and involvement, where in public health terms, I was really quite struck by the explication of social capital. I think that's a very important issue, and also to bring in not just linking, but bridging social capital. I mean, these are things that not many people talk about, but they're very, very important. And I think they're critical to Odisha, because one thing to learn from Odisha is that, you hear about political will, but here there's a political confidence in people that you're not getting to see really in other states. There's a confidence which leads to a certain degree of self-esteem, self-worth, and confidence in the poorest of the poor. I mean, believe me, I'm working in PBTG villages. There is still a sense of ownership or connection between urban Odisha, Bhubaneswar, and rural areas in Odisha. There's still some connection between the poorest of the poor, feeling that the government is still somewhere their own, rather than people to fear or people to not be allied with in some sense. So I think that social capital, that struck me as being very important. I did want to say some things about, and of course, the focus on SHGs, but perhaps more needs to be said about gender, because I think that remains, even though SHGs have been used very successfully in Odisha as compared to the rest of the country where they simply don't exist. But is it truly gender transformative? I think that remains a question for many of us to really think about how SHGs might be becoming a very utilitarian kind of aspect of Odisha governance. So some emerging concerns that I think don't figure yet are obesity, the rise. You do talk of the rise of NCTs, but when you speak of malnutrition, the other spectrum of that, and I think Odisha is really in danger in some of those areas. When you speak of data, Amarji, data protection and privacy, very important. Thank you for talking about that. But at the same time, there's also data fudging. There's also a push, which is a lot of it is to do with central push from, for example, the portion tracker. I mean, we have been raising these issues with Niti Aayog and so on, that there is a certain central push for data to come at any cost, and at any cost, without looking at field circumstances and plausibilities and practicalities, is leading to data incorrectness, which is very concerning because you can't do public health without true data. And really, we're not being very concerned or very worried about that. Within the ICDS, within the health systems, these are problems with data quality and data correctness. And why that is happening, there's a whole analysis of that also. So I mean, I think there are many other small things. For example, in vaccines, you raise the patents issue, and so these are the major policy issues have been taken up and covered. That's my satisfaction with the book, even if the evidence in the argument may not be as vigorous as the researcher would have done it. So I would just like to say that Odisha stands as a beacon of hope, and the book is refreshing because it reminds me that there are people like me, that there are politicians who seem to be analytical, to be thoughtful, to be sensitive and considerate, and perhaps open to critiques and criticisms, and going forward. And they certainly seem to have the will to do better for their own people and their own country. So I was just happy to read this book. Thank you.
So the score is even now. So no, but that's the reason, Vandana, you are here. I mean, I think making those very specific, relevant observations, and actually looking at the broader import of the effort is to lend hope, not in a foolish or stupid way, but hope with I mean, what one would say, cautious optimism. Optimism alongside caution. I mean, not to go gung ho, but yes, there is a certain amount of celebration, and we cannot forget that Dr. Amar Patnaik is a BJD politician. BJD is in power in Odisha, so there is a bit of the government did great. Thing is expected, but at the same time, I do agree with you. I did see at different places, and to actually, I hadn't read all of his, and some of his articles I had read, but it was refreshing, and it was quite gratifying to see that he is calling the spade at places where it is necessary. So that was quite progressive about that. Very right, you said progressive. Yeah. Let's move on to Dr. Maya for your initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Vivek. I'm sorry he's left, because yes, he introduced the thought about quality of the book. Okay. Now, I read books to get an idea out of the book. If I look at a painting, the technique of the painting, there are many different techniques that one can use to convey an idea of the painting. And I frankly don't start criticizing the brushstrokes of the painter and why the red was next to the yellow. What's the idea? And this book has a very powerful idea in it. Yes. And before I say what that idea is, you said you're taking the perspective of children, and I'm going to take the perspective of very old people. We have said that in the pandemic, you mentioned older people. Sorry about your loss, Vivek also. The most vulnerable people in the pandemic were older people. So if you want to know, like you go down in a mine, a coal mine, sort of the health of the environment in the coal mine, you put a canary in it, the most delicate bird. And if that suffers, then you know there's danger. So in the pandemic, whether older people suffered more or less was a good indicator of the quality of the systems of the society. Okay. So I am chairman of HelpAge International, coming to you. As I say myself personally, in the so-called third chapter of my life, it is said that the first chapter of one's life, and all Vivek is not here, but our own Vedic systems would also say that, is when you are like a child learning. Then you come to the second chapter where you're performing. And the performance is within the forms, of the society or the economy. You play formal roles in the given form of the society or the, nowadays we call it economy. And the third chapter is when you sort of move on and you start becoming, let me say, reflective, and you really look back and learn what you did not learn and should have learned, and what you had learned indeed. It is a wisening up that happens in the third chapter of the life. And we had, during the pandemic, my organization, Elpage International, been checking about which countries of the world were able to take care of their older people best. At the same time, being like, you looked at me when you were critical of the Niti Aayog. I'm not central.
You were earlier.
I was planning commission many years ago, but that was my beef for the planning commission. We were too central. We were too economics, which Vivek still is. And the point is that we also had to look, therefore, during the pandemic about how many people actually died because of the health side, and economy, how much it was disrupted. It had to be so. So when you look at these two criteria, let me say, the health effects, people dying, getting infected, and also economic disruption, which country did the best in the world? The country that has done the best in the world during the pandemic by the composite system health indicators was Vietnam. And being familiar with the approach that various countries have been taking before the pandemic for years towards older people, Vietnam had a very unusual system that older people, we have formed women's associations like many people have done. Vietnam has women's associations, but specifically in the constitution, it is required that there will be provision made in every village town to enable older people to meet and to discuss. It's like we used to have under the village trees, Battingham, Montefiore, and you get the wisdom of the older people. So there was a resilience in the community, and it was shown that because you were taking care, you thought, of the older people, they were also taking care of the condition of the system, pointing out before that. And this enabled Vietnam in every respect, meaning the economic disruptions in the villages and the towns, as well as the public health disruptions. It was a poorer country, didn't have access to the sort of vaccine development we can, to have come out in the world's best. We don't hear these stories, we hear about New Zealand, isolated. It's not this. So I come to saying what was the lesson from Vietnam, and this is I want to come to India, and your book is so timely and powerful to me. India is into the third chapter also. Our first chapter was after independence, where there was a general consensus about what sort of country and which direction we are going. Then there was a hiatus, there was a disruption. This was, let's say, the early Nehru years. And in mid-1960s and after that with Indira Gandhi, there was a confusion in the country. Then again, we settled into the second chapter, which started in late 1980s and 1990s going on, which is a consensus about the form of an economy. It's mostly not economy, sorry, we forgot society. The form of the economy. It's a global idea. If you get your economy right and everything else will be all right. So we've been in that second chapter. The whole world is going through a disruption in the last few years. And the whole world needs to go into its third chapter of sort of wisdom to go back to realizing that the foundations of an economy are society, our communities. And so in my research, since leaving the Planning Commission, but it arose in the Planning Commission, I said, we are getting it all wrong. We're trying to, with economists and top down and instruct the states. We keep saying that federal is the least of it. We've said that it has to be local, village and town communities. We are far from that. We're still debating about federal structure and Supreme Court powers. And by institution, we talk about this forms of institutions at this level. Institutions are really how people live their lives, and that's on the ground. So the solution, and by the way, the point again is that you can't say that the solution from the center for Odisha can be the same as for Kashmir. Even as you mentioned, the sort of environmental disasters that Kashmir has have nothing to do with the ocean. You have. But there is something which enables resilience to come into a community, be well researched. And what is that? It comes down to, as you said, the community is socially bonded. It is most aware about the vulnerabilities in its own system. So when the community is resilient, the system is resilient in terms of its knowledge and its actions. So given this, every community, every country must find its own solutions. Within large countries like ours, every state must find its own solutions. And like you said in Odisha, I'm sure that in the forest areas and in the coastal areas, each community is in charge, or hopefully getting more and more in charge. So the solution to the global systemic problem, we have a COVID pandemic problem, we have an economic problem, environmental problem, is local community solutions made and implemented by communities is the solution. This is the solution to global systemic problems. We're trying to find solutions to climate change by people with the science of climate, trying to find a solution for everybody. I'm a scientist. I've now become a system scientist. And in complex adaptive systems, the only solution to the health of the whole system is local community solutions. And they will be different everywhere. There are certain principles of enabling communities to form their own solutions. So that's what I've got. And that's the third chapter of your book. I found that third chapter, coincidentally, I said the third chapter of India, third chapter of my life is the third chapter of your book. It's about communities. It's about solidarity in communities. It's about women being at the heart of solidarity in community. And there's a reason, and your young colleagues here, the women, I say, look, we're getting it all wrong when we say we want to have more women participate in the economy. Which economy? The formal economy. We want them to give up being a woman and start being like a man, dressing like a man in the offices nowadays. Talk like a man, be bold like a man, judge you to be as effective as a man. Those institutions are defunct, I'm saying. Our corporate institutions are not capable. They're very selfish institutions. They cannot be building community in the world. And even forms of government, which are hierarchical, patriarchal, cannot be the solution for everyone. We need to have community solutions in which the same women have to be naturally, and so please include the older people also. Quite often they're older women, actually, they tend to live longer. So please put older people and women at the heart of the formation of stronger communities. And children will come along. Yes? So I would like, if we get to, with you, to say your next book, since he's talking about it, let's concentrate it on chapter 3. It is the difference. All the others are to be talked about, but this is what the world must get. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's where wisdom plays out. You said so many things in such simple, with such simple words. Thank you very much. Mr. Sharma, would you like to go there or you want to come here?
I think it'll be easier.
How does it?
It's always difficult to speak at last because most of the points are already
And
made.
you're going to talk about the book by a fellow lawmaker.
Absolutely, and that's the point that I want to make. See, my takeaway introduction from the book is very different. I'm not as erudite and as accomplished as the panel over here, but so I believe that this book is more of an expression of a career bureaucrat turned politician and how he sees life and how he's seen things evolve. Be it the government, be it the public administration machinery, how they've responded, and perhaps I think we are the unlucky or lucky ones to see the pandemic in our lifetime, since a pandemic of this size and scale doesn't happen very frequently. So for me, it's a learning. The way the book has been quite accessible. It's an easy read, and he's sharing his thoughts, his learnings, and that's how I take it, because I believe that we all learn. And I'll just expand on what Arunji said. That learning is something that it goes through different phases of our life. I think it very aptly talks about a couple of things, the public-private partnerships, the enterprise, the solution, the task force, the I haven't read the book from cover to cover, but I've read certain chapters. But the way the government had an approach, a mindset towards the problem at hand, there wasn't a lot of precedent to tackle with the problem. And how would the administration go about it? Do they know how they use their ability, what they have used in the past for the natural calamities and disasters that have come into place. Uh, I think also I'd like to critique some aspects, of course. If there was what is missing is the holistic approach of the book in terms of something like a pandemic cannot be seen as at a microscopic level as just a state, although it's a state subject. I mean, there were a lot of things which are missed out. I didn't find a mention of the world's largest food security program anywhere, which continues something of that size and scale, which has continued for the last 3 years almost now, and some other financial impacts and so on and so forth. But having said that, I mean, the book talks about limitations of the infrastructure or public administration, about what things need to be done in terms of how to approach the problems in the future. But it doesn't really talk about, how the problem was everyone's problem and the macro issues that have affected it. So I hope you can, look at that part. But other than that, I do definitely see it as a something that is a learning experience, and then you shared your learning experience through your writings, through the book, and there are many aspects that need to be taken for even lawmakers, policymakers, people in administrative positions, how to deal with certain situations that come about. Whether it was about the way the government interacted and tied up with WHO for increasing testing and so on and so forth. These are smaller things but have a larger impact when you are juxtaposed to a situation like this. So, my only piece of advice would be that you need to take a holistic and a macro perspective as well when you write a book on such a topic. And, while Odisha had done many things right, but it cannot be devoid of, what we were doing as a country, whether it was the vaccine program, whether it is about the food security, whether it is talking about the timely implementation of the lockdown. Obviously, the state and center have to work in cohesion over there. But a lot of those things are connected, like with an umbilical cord. So perhaps some mention of that. When some good work is done by the central government, perhaps the due should be given to them as well, like it's due to the state government as well. So barring that, I think it was good read and good learnings for me, and I'm a optimist, if I may say so. So I like to see the positives and what I have taken away from the book as a learning that I can use in my life.
I make a suggestion. Why don't you make it a little more conversational? Why don't you come to the dais and as we go through the subsequent
Can I give my first round response to
Perhaps the first panel.
No, I
just told them that
He's a good friend.
they have switched up their
Closed room, otherwise it is.
yeah, they have switched up their seats.
now they've switched on these.
Now they're yeah.
All or nothing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So thank you so much. I will, of course, respond to both the criticisms as well as the points which requires deeper delving into at a future point of time. Before I say anything about Dr. Vivek Devra, I must tell you this, that we are family friends. We are extremely close. Okay. So let me make that thing. But I must say that I think he didn't have the time. I contacted him when he was in Guwahati. He did not really want to come, but I forced him to come because I really admired his, scholarship. And therefore, I requested him, and that's where to rush because he used to go to Gurgaon. So, he said, I can only stay for till 7 o'clock. But what he missed out probably is that he didn't really go through the first page of the book. He probably went through the other parts of the book. This book is the culmination of various essays that I wrote on pertinent contemporary issues that emerged in India during the pandemic years 2021 and 2022. It is a series of essays which have been written at that particular point of time. The isolation wards which have been set up are required to be augmented, I can't. The situation doesn't arise now. How do I update now? If I update now, then I don't really capture that moment. And that is where he has missed completely. If I update the data now, then it is a completely different picture. What I am trying to reflect in this book is what was the situation prevailing, because now people will not understand what was the first lockdown until we move until the first wave lockdown until we saw the second wave. Now, who will capture in posterity? If you want to capture certain portions, how do you know that? If you update everything, then how do you capture history? So that is where I think he missed out, because he didn't really go through this. Since the pandemic struck the world, after the second sentence says the pandemic struck the world, many features emerged which needed to be analyzed to understand where India stood in the world. This is also to what my friend Karthik has said. In many of the articles, one does write that India is responding very well. And of course, I have to write about Odisha because I feel like writing about Odisha. I can't write about Maharashtra. I don't know enough about Maharashtra. In case I do know more about Kerala, I'll probably write one day because I've been posted there in Kerala. But I have mentioned about Kerala at some places because I was posted there. So this is a real life experiences. I am not theoretical at all here. I am not pretending to be a researcher, academic book, as you were saying, the referencing. My first book was full of references, and that was only consigned to the libraries of the world. So I really didn't want that, and therefore I take his advice very seriously. But this is the point which I, of course, since he's not here, I'll tell him later that it is just like if you are doing a court case, you have a chronology of events. You write from what happened in particular day, particular year, because then you explain to the court that this is what happened at that point of time, which may not be the situation at a later point of time. And this book was only that, and that's why it's an anthology of essays. It's not a continuous commentary on the history of how it was dealt with over a period of time. And therefore, there are some issues which have been missed out. Very rightly, Madam has said, Dr. Vandana Prasad has said, Arun Mehra did say that the third chapter should have been elaborated upon. Karthik has said.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, no, you said that this is not okay.
What he said is that should be.
No, he said it should be my future. Yeah, I correct myself. Thank you so much. So the point is, there are some things which I may have missed out because I may not have written. I may not have had the understanding to write on those things, but not that they were not important. They could have been important. This is only a limited reflection of certain things on which I chose to write at that point of time, capturing that particular days or months, events. I did not deliberately, I'm repeating it, did not deliberately choose to update those figures because they existed at that point of time. The National Health Family Survey is the latest 2021 is already out. I can also update it.
So
but then I will not really get that picture.
Let's try to spend our time today on what the book has in it rather than what it doesn't have. So what it doesn't have, can always be an endless list. And it's always good to leave out things because they give you another opportunity to come up with the book. So let's just, I want to bring you all back to a few things that I think we should, because, when I read through some of the chapters and on a particular issue, when you are coming back with a time lag, I'm seeing there is a revision of stance. For example, let's take the state financial conditions. Your first article talks about the stress, and it talks about in a very, very the ruling party's politician in Odisha, and with you don't want to upset the apple cart. It talks everything politically correct piece. You are actually pushing the envelope in the second piece, where you are saying put cess into the divisible pool. So it's Amar Patnaik also is evolving through these writings and as the book is progressing, and that actually happens with all of us. So I want to take on some of these things, the highlights from the book, and go to our panelists what they feel has been said and what could possibly be explored going forward. So I think one of the first and most important thing that you have talked about, and very few in Odisha have talked about this in such elaborate manner, is about the child rights during the pandemic. So that's one area if we can take up, and if Vandana can throw some light on that. The other one where I would like you, Dr. Patnaik, to come in is when you're talking about the data protection. And it is very important because there are first-hand experience you are having there. We are seeing those things. And then you have right now as we speak, the government is trying to pilot the bill. I don't think it got piloted, but it was all set to be piloted in this current session. So I think it will be good from a policy standpoint to talk about that, and I would lean on you to elaborate. But first to Dr. Vandana Prasad and Mr. Myra, if you feel like to weigh in on this entire issue, it will be good. I also want you to say a few things on what his observations have been on the state financial relations, what the state of state financial relations are today in the aftermath of the pandemic, what are the strengths and stress, and how do we go about dealing with it? How much does the book explore, and what more can be explored? And then I'll come to Karthik here. Why don't you go, Bandana?
Thanks again. I mean, Odisha is with all that's been said about the positives in Odisha, it's still a very conventional and patriarchal community. I think in terms of systems of education and care, there's still a huge struggle. I mean, the baseline that Odisha started with as a very poor state, I think we all aware of that, conscious of that, and it's done well from that standpoint. But there's a huge amount of work to do, and children are at the base of it. But one thing that Amarji has not spoken of, maybe because again it was some years ago. But one thing that Odisha is beginning to show the rest of the country is also its focus on early childhood care and development, and that is the fundament at which we need to be working and investing in human resources in development, the overall development of a country. Every development piece understands early childhood to be the fundament where it's going to happen. And Odisha is really in the process of launching almost a campaign for childcare, because we must recognize that all poor women, they are working women, whether they're working in their fields, in their homes, with their animals, or going to Dungar and working something to the tune of, time use studies are very rare, but from 12 to 16 to 18 hours a day. And children have to grow up in that domain, and who compensates is older siblings, who then their schooling is compromised and so on and so forth. Many times the elders, but in urban slums, which urban poverty is now huge, not getting that kind of care. And really, it should not be left to elders to fulfill roles that require a huge amount of time and energy to do successfully. And so malnutrition continues to be a problem. Childcare continues to be a problem. Child labor, to some extent, informal, continues to be a problem, and so on and so forth. So there are many issues with child rights in the state of Odisha and in the country, perhaps even more so in many other states. I mean, with less concern perhaps than Odisha faces. So I think that Odisha's current focus on early childhood care, these are very incipient and new trends in policy that we're seeing, that they're really worth keeping a finger on and supporting this in many different ways. We're seeing this in, through DMF funds in Hon'ble areas, because funding opportunities are better. Parallel funding opportunities are better as compared to in the WCD, where there is a certain grip on central funds and central schemes like the creche programs, National Creche Scheme, and so on, are fairly restrictive in their ability to really fulfill the needs of a particular community. So I think that's one part of the story. I think child rights are very intensely linked to women's rights, and the woman-child dyad is the invisible, space in which women's empowerment is very critical, and women's time, women's energy, women's own health and nutrition, which again, I think Odisha needs to be looking at some of these things. But more and more, I mean, for me as a social analyst of policy, I think labor issues are critical, Rajesh. And nowhere in the country am I seeing that kind of focus, and I found it somewhat missing here as well. I mean, we were speaking of the central government's many contributions. I think the PDS, we're trying to save it against many, onslaughts, and it's a very valuable thing. The midday meal, the ICDS, very valuable central programs, no doubt. There were very major issues of the lockdown that no politician has acknowledged so far. A lockdown that's announced in a 4-hour period of time. Did we ever hear an apology to our laborers for that? We didn't. Currently, what is the situation of even the informal sector of, women workers? We speak of women's empowerment, but we have a captive, set of women who are working as ASHA, working as Anganwadi workers, and not getting, decent wages, not getting a living wage. But we don't hear acknowledgement from the political scenario, from that part of the system, which is the informal care economy. And 90% of our, I would say maybe 100% of our poor working in the informal economy. So what is happening to labor rights in the informal economy? And child rights are, you cannot divorce, in my opinion, child rights from that. You have raised many critical issues of child protection, which are important, and I think trafficking and so on, not so much from Odisha as perhaps from Jharkhand and other states, but still child labor in areas, and the quality of education is, I think, something that really needs much better focus. You did speak of primary education as being very important, but I think that schools in remote areas are really suffering from lack of care and lack of attention, where perhaps other governments, like I think Delhi state government has done perhaps something that we can be learning from. So I'll just stop it.
Right. So would you like to comment on the data protection?
Look, I want to again comment. You're going down into the details. I'm saying please look at the bigger picture. The problem that we have in the world and in India is the architecture of governance, of how the system can govern itself, how the system governs itself. Okay? All those are details, and this subject, education, that subject, data. How do we govern these issues? We've got a crisis of governance globally, and we don't have a crisis of governance in the country, but we do have it because we're not getting the outcomes that we want.
Well, the challenge
We have a breakdown of governance, but we have an intellectual crisis of the right form of governance. And I said earlier to some friends we were talking here that, look, we talk about governance and institutions, about, like I said, whether the Supreme Court has the right or the Parliament has the right to do all this. We again get the top view. But actual governance, like in democracy, is by the people. It's not for the people, of the people, it's by the people. And this is missing. What would be the appropriate form, architecture of governance, which would be democratic? And I said earlier, it's not a matter of democracy as the norm, that they should be having the right to do it. That's the only way it will be done. Because that's where the reality comes to the ground. And when you divide things into subjects, this is the, you would have done the research in India. In every village of India, there are probably 300 or 400 schemes. Half the states, half the center. There's a khichdi there. The people don't even know what is supposed to be done for them. The people at the functionary levels also don't know what the others are doing, or if they do know, then they're going to concentrate on their silos and what they are charged to do with their budgets. And when we got our philanthropic organizations coming into the kitchen, they're also specialized. I'm going to concentrate on the education part. I'm going to concentrate on something with some global best practice, research wisdom on that. It makes the khichdi even worse. So there is all this waste of financial resources, philanthropic resources, our own budgetary resources, local resources, and knowledge resources. It's not coming together. Let us say the complex systems theory, which I say is the science we need much more of, has to be applied in economics, most of all, and in society generally. The enlightenment that the world has come through since the European Enlightenment is one about fragmenting knowledge, about also researching from the top. You get the right data about the whole thing, like Vivek is saying, get it right, and then by looking at the data, somehow you'll find the solution. And the solution will be a universal solution. And Niti Aayog, Planning Commission even worse. We want to compare the states over time and amongst each other, because that's the way we think scientifically you can know what the solution is. And so we want standard data. So as you said about stories, I mean, some things then were relevant they are not to be considered now. Okay, so it's a story which evolves. So to learn, each situation must learn for itself, and we must learn how situations learn. It's not about the data and comparisons, but our economists want to say which state is doing better. I'm saying that state is doing better, which is improving the fastest. And therefore, I would say there are studies here, and they are in India, about India. Recently, the ORF, along with PwC, has done a terrific study as part of the G20 to bring to the G20 think tanks in the T20 process that, the South, and India particularly, has something to say. And what is that title of the study? Climate, Community and Cooperation. And I read it all. 70 pages, nicely done. Nice pictures. In terms of publishing, no one could find an error in it. It's all citations right and numbers right. But it's citing Odisha once again in the question of resilience. That story again. No, it's a story, and I don't care whether you say how many people actually died in the cyclone 30, 40 years ago. I know it was much more. We were alarmed. It's very little now. That's enough. How did it happen? The story of how it happens can't be a series of numbers. It is a narrative like you write a book, which is a story, and then you get it. Yeah, I can't get things through numbers. I can't get complex change stories through numbers at all. So the way we learn, researchers in economics and everywhere, but economics becomes so bad, it has to be through mathematics. And we're talking about society. You can't convert people into numbers. All our data about poverty is for numbers. But as we say, poverty is a multi-dimensional phenomenon. When you say, I want to include all the phenomena, my goodness, how much weightage do I give? In Odisha, maybe a different weightage to the different aspects in somewhere else. But let's say this is a kitchen. So the two good things. In India, I'm saying, the aspirational districts program, which let's give credit to the Prime Minister and the Niti Aayog for this one. It's been very good. So there's been two international studies. This has been a 4 or 5 year program. Two international studies, one by the UNDP, other by Harvard Public School Competition Research Institute, and they have actually with data as they would do to say that change, the improvement in the aspirational districts, which are the worst 118 districts in the country, many of which are in Odisha because of the past history and other places, it's been so much that the delta in the last 4 years has been several times the delta on any period of India's history before. So it's not to do with the BJP government or the Congress government, it's the method. And this is where the Prime Minister did push the ministers, and you might have been there to say, look, वहाँ जाके सुनो तो सही. Go there. And you will find that your own ministry is doing various things, and some of them will appear to you as a good politician to useless things. No, your advisors, economics are going to say, do this thing. But you say, no, this doesn't make sense. So the wisdom of politics must come into economics. Economics has no wisdom. It's got a lot of data. So this is where we need to be thinking differently and learning differently. And I do say that there's a paradigm shift required one very clearly in how we learn, tell stories, and get wisdom out of stories. So what the genre of your next book will be, think about it, and then write it accordingly. Maybe you should have the courage not to cite any statistics.
That's
Very qualitative.
And then the idea comes back to the idea.
Qualitative studies, you
So
really learn more because
we have 15 more minutes to go, so quickly let me bring Karthik in, and if you want to weigh in on those concerns around architecture of governance, and then we'll
Perhaps,
Let's talk a
the,
little bit about data since why I've
I'm coming.
perhaps the title of the next book should be Learn to Learn. At least I would take that away from the entire thing. I think as a coming from the media and being a younger lawmaker and still studying and realizing my job, this is my third session that I'm in. I think for me it's about experiences, it's about learning, it's about adapting, it's about I think the advantage over here that he brings on from his perspective per se is that when you're a bureaucrat and you turn into a politician, you understand the gaps of the realities and the pitfalls that lie. And when you pen down these articles, essays in different points of time as well, you look at it from a particular context. That is what at least how what I have deduced from your book so far.
Absolutely.
I would also say that one of the most important takeaways is not about data, like Arunji said. It's about getting the fundamentals right, the approach right. I think whether it's about the state government or the central government, there were certain things which were done in the right time, the right manner, by the central government and the state government. There are costs to bear, there are social costs, there are other costs to bear, of course. But no one's ready for such a situation. When you talk about a pandemic, the whole idea about the pandemic is that you are confronted with a situation which is one of your worst nightmares. And how can we use this experience and learning to be ready for next time such a situation happens and occurs is, I think, the biggest takeaway from the book. And at a very, very fundamental level, I think that is what we need to build upon. I mean, those are the experiences and what not to do, learnings that will go a long way for a lot of administrative people as well and a lot of lawmakers as well, whether it is state or the center. But having said that, I think we must celebrate the things which we have done right as well. I think that is extremely important part of the humane aspect of how you approach such situations. And I think and the position that India has been able to project itself. I mean, for the first time, we were not looking to the West for what we need to do. It was a global pandemic. Everyone was in the same boat. Everyone was in the same position. So the ability to rise to that occasion, I mean, the resilience India as a country showed, or resilience Odisha as a state showed, is something definitely to talk about, whether it's in the book or, I would recommend Dr. Patnaik, and that's an open offer, and we will not ask you for data. You please do write in the Sunday Guardian, and we will publish your articles over there because I feel that you are trying to make a change and bring about a difference in the most positive sense, and we would love to encourage that. A lot of learnings for me as well. I think we really need to be more informed about what we are talking about as lawmakers. I happen to be on the communications and IT committee, and we've had about five meetings so far. And we touched upon data protection, we touched upon a multitude of issues. But when you look at the size and the scale and the magnitude of the problems that lie, and these are not problems which are really akin to us. These are impacts. I mean, it comes in multiple manifestations. Every decision that will be taken here will have impacts in multiple manifestations across. It's not one ministry, it's not one person. You're going to affect multiple ministries, people in more than one way in the decision that will be taken, the laws that we laid out right now. The reason I'm giving that example is because we are not any different from the rest of the world. We are at the same cusp as the rest of the world. And whatever we need to do as lawmakers also, we really need to study, do our homework, be informed as to what are we talking about and what is it that we are recommending, because it will have a very far-reaching impact for times to come. So, just to sum it up, I think that's my deduction from the book, and I'd be happy to publish our material, sir. Very happy to do so, as long as that positivity continues.
Yes.
Very well said. Thank you. I think we'll take some questions, but before that, I do think we should spend some time talking about the learnings and the understanding that you came up with on the data protection issue and all these issues related to data enforcement.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be very brief why I talked about data. Because during the pandemic, for the first time, we moved completely into a situation where data, a lot of our activities which were earlier being done physically, got to be done through a process which was either online, digitally capturing data. We have got statistics relating to the manifold number of times the digital transactions increased in India and probably globally as well. Education was being delivered online. So data was the consumption, the generation of data, capture of data, storage of data, consumption of the data, processing of the data increased manifold during this period. During this period only, the Personal Data Protection Bill got introduced on the lines of the EU GDPR, and that is why I have mentioned about it. I did mention about the necessity for divulging the privacy of one particular patient whom we detected because we wanted to save the entire population. Similarly, the children's data was being collected while giving courses. Women's data was being collected because we were trying to be efficient in delivery of services during the period of the pandemic. But what we were not that cognizant about is the fact that the privacy, the more the data that was being collected, the challenge to the privacy of that citizen was also equally increasing. And therefore, there was a need for regulation to save the privacy of citizens. While sorry, some amount of compromise, depending on the proportionality of the event, is required and is provided for under the reasonable restrictions clause in Article 19.2, the balance had to be maintained. The pandemic had to be negotiated. The delivery, let us say, questions were raised about Arogya Setu, whether the data was being collected and was being used elsewhere. And they came up with changes. Because of these questions, they came up with these changes. Now, if you look at Arogya Setu now, you will not really know what was the process through which these changes took place. It is captured here. That is because I was writing at that particular point of time. If I would have updated it, I would have had a very good Arogya Setu with the data protection probably protected. So to that extent, I have dealt with at various places why privacy of the citizens is important, but at the same time, you have to also think about the privacy, the necessity of the governments to deliver service to a larger section of people. So what you basically say is that public interest sometimes, in very simplistic terms, takes precedence over the right to privacy of individual citizens in certain situations. But it has to be proportional, it has to be legitimate. This is what the Purtasuru judgment says. So this is in brief is about data, but you are right. What Dr. Bandha Prasad was saying about the data governance structure. Now, the government of India is working on a data governance structure. I have written an article that India's data capture itself, which happens at the primary level. You see, you get those death rates during the pandemic. What is the system? The system I have described. A sarpanch reports the data, and then it gets collected at a block level and then at the district level and gets reported. In a normal time, the sarpanch is reporting in a day, probably one or two. But during the second wave, when so many people were dying, was the data being accurate? Was it being real time? It cannot be. So we need to have a data governance architecture. And I can tell you, I wrote at that point of time, it was there in Times of India, government is doing it now. Government is doing it now. So one is happy about it, that we are also moving forward. And as Karthikeya said, this is just a capture of the experiences that one went through in different areas and to learn from that. That is on the data side. The other point that you were saying is relating to
center state relations.
No. The center-state relations in brief. The center-state relations, the cess and surcharge, whether it should become a part of the divisible pool. Now, that thought came at that time because, Dr. Vivek Devara started with one sentence: health is a state subject. This is the line in answer to every parliamentary question when it is uncomfortable. Agriculture is also a state subject. Education, primary education is also a state subject. So does it mean that the states will have to deal with it without any resources? So that is why you see the context, as Karthikeya said, the context is important. You have to understand the context. Now, under the current system of governance or the current architecture of devolution of resources between center and states, the cess and surcharge are to be collected by the center as per an article of the Constitution. It's not that the government can change it. It has to be amended. So this has been brought forward here. This is issue which has been highlighted. This cannot be solved by Government of India alone or by the states alone. Probably a broader consensus has to evolve. Many states are talking about lack of resources to handle critical areas of education, health, which are placed in the state subjects. So the idea is, as I said, to get the broad picture, to know these are the areas of concern which we faced during the pandemic, and going forward, we should actually be addressing them so that we get things right, things proper. Maybe new laws come in, maybe old laws get changed, they're amended. Now we talked about decriminalization. Dr. Vivek Devara was saying that now it has come. Yes, it has come now through a bill, but I was writing it 2 years ago, and there, even now, I was just trying to read that particular portion regarding decriminalization. The last line of that particular article says, until the courts are made efficient are made more efficient, the purpose of decriminalizing offences will be defeated and will hurt the banking system and the very business environment that the government seeks to improve by bringing in such dilution. Even for fools now, even after passing of the bill, the same thing will happen. The delivery of justice has to be fast, prompt, and for that, somewhere else the problem is, and that has to be changed. You have to understand in that context. Right?
Thank you. I see a lot of young faces. If you have a question, you have the first right of refusal before I go over.
And to Arun Mehra sir, the chapter 3, I really will work on that because that my first book on institutional change and power asymmetry, mind you, I'm a physics graduate. I only looked at numbers. My first speech in Parliament, I said I'm a man of numbers. But during my research on institutional economics as to why government programs do fail in the field, or where there are islands of success amidst oceans of failure. The village in which it has been a success, the very next contiguous village is a failure. Why is it that? That is what I was trying to study. And there I learned about the institutions at the village level. Informal institutions are equally important. Formal institutions and informal institutions, they create the kind of asymmetries that happen, and therefore the name of my book was Institutional Change and Power Asymmetry in the Context of Rural India. Even though I loved numbers, I followed while addressing this question, trying to understand this question, I had to follow an exploratory process of understanding the various stories of various institutional entrepreneurs who brought about change, the village level rural change agents, and how they did the convening of informal and formal institutions to achieve a certain piece of change. That cannot come through numbers. So this was my learning in my PhD. And not to say that I didn't love numbers. I still love numbers because my background is in physics, in economics. But then you learn more.
Yeah. We need to wind up. If there are questions, you have a question? Keep it brief. Introduce yourself. So we have 5 to 7 minutes. So just be brief.
Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Patnaik. Congratulations on your book. My name is Kazim. I'm a tech policy researcher. So one question I have for you is, during the pandemic and even during the vaccination process, we saw India take the opportunity of technology to deliver vaccination for its people, and also the development of Arogya Setu to mitigate or to sort of minimize the spread of COVID. So the question for you, sir, is, in your experience, did you observe and what's your understanding of the opportunity of technology to help mitigate or to sort of reduce the spread of the virus and also to deliver vaccination? What would have been if we did not have the technological tools? And what has been the contribution of such technology to actually reach and help last mile delivery to the people?
We'll take all the questions. The gentleman there,
I would see the
The small group.
See, there are two data points. As Mr. Patnaik said, he is quite good in number crunching. One is the death toll, Dr. Maria also said, and second is the financial loss. So if we reflect on what's the death toll percentage, if data is correct, how accurate, what's the veracity of the data? One. Two is the financial loss of Odisha. That will make Odisha stand out in the whole global scenario, like Vietnam scenario. And second thing, during pandemic, what is the intensity of our trust and obeisance to Lord Jagannath? Because the stress management of Odisha people, I believe, is good because people started praying more to the God. Has that impacted something? Is it very in a lighter way? Because people started really praying day in, day out. Otherwise, people were not going to give.
Okay, I think we've got a question.
I must congratulate Dr. Patnaik. In Odisha, I have seen that during the pandemic, the governance, every MP and MLA, they're sitting for 24/7 for the work. Even all these MLAs and MPs, they are sitting for the governance. And whatever lessons actually he has written all these things because of practical experience. I must congratulate you. And the governance of Odisha is a model for the whole country today. I I myself seen during the COVID time, which Rajesh was also there, gone around Odisha, in every constituency, the MLAs and MPs and the local ministers were there during the migration of the workers during the very heavy pandemic 2020, 2021, and we are there. So that's the kind of experience he has written in the book. That is remarkable. Not on the data people are sitting in the, drawing room, they collect the data, quoting all these things, even being an experienced lawyer for 30, 35 years in the Supreme Court. I never quote anybody's. Only question to Amar Patnaik is the practical experience. He's a practical man. He was an accountant general. He was going to the root of the administration of Odisha during his tenure as an accountant general. So he can tell about during the pandemic, the experience was wonderful. Even for the normal time, what's the good governance? He should write a book on the good governance. Okay, that's a suggestion. Good suggestion. Yeah. I hope you are not on the way to join BJD. Not at all. Just check. Not at all. Just check.
It's regarding actually justice delivery system you have talked about. Really, this something being a lawyer. My friend, he has told that 35 years in the Supreme Court, same here, almost more than 30 years in the Supreme Court. Justice delivery systems, if you see, it's the dockets of the cases. So we cannot, certainly everything boils out from the Rajya under the constitution, that is the judiciary. They have to make a balance between the executive as well as the lawmakers, legislature. But what happened today? The populations and the number of judges is so low in comparison to other countries, developed countries. You can get the answer very easily. And I don't know when we are going to that proportion. And one thing I like to tell to the House, that for 250 years, USA doesn't have changed their number of judges in the Supreme Court of USA, America, from nine judges, 250 years back, today also 9 judges. They never sits in single, double, or any full bench or constitution bench. All 9 judges sits for hearing of a matter. No changes, no new judges. So that's the way we can look forward. Our courts are not there.
Good suggestion and intervention. I think we are really running out of time. I would want to.
Yeah, because you must.
Thank you.
You
Thank
must
you
give
for
the
making
answer.
time.
Thank you, sir.
Why don't we just?
Yeah, I'll just finish this. I think the first question was related to use of technology to address issues during the pandemic, particularly in the issue of testing, treatment, and vaccination subsequently. So I must tell you this, that had it not been for use of technology or technology per se, we would not have been able to address the pandemic. I remember Odisha's dashboard on number of beds available and ICU with oxygen beds and without oxygen beds being in the dashboard available. It was first in the country. And then later it was adopted by Niti Aayog. It is a question of learning for everybody. Someone did it first. Odisha did right a number of things right in the first place. As I said, because of his previous experience of handling disasters, natural disasters, that came in handy. But use of technology, subsequently, even for vaccination, everyone talks about it. And even if you go to the United States, you will get a vaccination certificate which has been written by hand. Now, in a country whose population is 1.4 billion, and people living in rural, remote areas, to move that vaccine, to get it administered in those hospitals, sub-primary hospitals, it is completely because of use of technology. So the use of technology has helped this generation to handle the pandemic much better than the 1918 Spanish flu. And maybe that's why we globally, we probably restricted the number of deaths. Maybe where it did not get applied, that's in parts of Africa, parts of other parts of the world as well, where there were several issues. But use of technology, even children's education, let us say. People might say that online courses are not as good as physical classes. That's right. But the point is, it is better than having nothing at all. It is better than having nothing at all. So I think technology played its part.
Increasing the efficiency.
Yeah. The second point relating to judiciary, actually, I said this. This has been discussed in Parliament. I have spoken about in Parliament that the judge to population ratio is too low in India. I think many celebrated lawyers have said this. And by the way, I am also started practicing lawyer, so I can say this. The third point relating to Odisha's model of governance. This is a capture that I have done in this book about Odisha's model of governance. But I have included many other areas as well. I should probably, what you are referring to is just to write about the unique community resilience that has been built in Odisha to handle crisis after crisis by a concerted effort of use of application of teamwork, technology, transparency, and doing things on time so as to bring about a transformational change. Change can be two types. One is the delta incremental change, another one is a transformative change. So the approaches has to be disruptive. And that is what Odisha followed. Many of the things Odisha probably did for the first time, experimenting with it, and it became successful. I'm sure there could be probably cases which probably didn't do as well. So this book captures some of those areas. It cannot be complete because, as I said, at that point of time, as Dr. Vivek Debre was talking about, at that point of time, forget about data. You could not even have people responding to your telephone calls to give you data. That was the situation during the first wave. And second wave, it made worse. All of us know this. In fact, I'll tell you, I think at that time I've written about democracy in a particular article. That why didn't we move to voting? Estonia, it happens. 48% of votes gets cast through one system in which you don't have to go to a polling booth. This is a transformational thing. We last time discussed in the election commission about remote voting machine. People who can vote remotely. There was a discussion. But I think the next stage when it will come to will be what I have written 20 years ago, or let's say 2 years ago. And that will be voting. Because if you're doing remote voting, then the next stage is that you don't have to, why do you have to carry an EVM machine and call it as RVM? And try to have number of people, presiding officers, so many, this is an expense. So things are evolving. Technology is of course evolving at a much faster pace than our probably as much faster than our thought processes. So this will get captured. I realize that the entire Odisha story is much more than what is covered in this book. But I have done my attempt. I did my little research what was available during those 2 years.
My question
and Jagannath, you said.
Jagannath and two metrics, data points.
Yeah, data points relating to growth and relating to number of how much has been saved, number of deaths and economic growth. So I really first you have to establish a causal relationship between these two factors, these two variables. I don't know whether I can establish that causal relationship. Why is the
We should keep it for.
And Jagannath, I agree. In fact, Jaya Jagannath to everyone.
Last
You need to be a little careful about the claims around financial loss because please remember Odisha is basically a mining extractive state and mining went on full bloom during the pandemic. So there can be very misleading consequences. We can have a lot more debate on that. So anyway, I think a lot of issues have gotten covered.
Odisha is the first state which auctioned the mines.
Yeah. So
Vijender, yes, my colleague. Why are you sitting there, sir? Gangwar Sahib is also there, the chairman of the Committee Public Understanding. So please come to the Vijender is a friend from college. He is a MP in the Lok Sabha.
Let me congratulate you on your book. Of course, I haven't read it, not so far. So I don't even know whether it's been, the point I have in mind is addressed in the book or not. But since a lot of talk on data was going on, so of course data is very important, especially in a situation of the kind which we had, because there was a sense of denial at all levels, not just during the pandemic, first wave, second wave, subsequently. And the denial I'm referring to is not at just the governmental level. And governments at every level. And when you are asked a question whether anyone has died because of lack of oxygen, and it's not the central government alone. Every government has reported no one died. So
I really don't know what data we are relying on. But my question goes beyond this. There was a sense of denial in accepting uh, COVID as a reason for death at the family and societal level. And not just because there was a stigma attached to it. Stigma was only in the first wave and hardly anyone died. The real hit was in the second wave. And one came across villages after villages, families after families where uh, people have died, but there was a total sense of denial. Is it Khansi Zukham tha, Dama tha, things of that kind. So, did you in your study anywhere or in your state come across this where not just at the governmental level, but there was denial all around? Thank you.
Can take these two together. Last question.
Good evening, sir. I'm Abhay from Sri Guru Tegh Bahadur Khalsa College. So I have two questions for you. So the first question is about, can you guide us about the process of you writing the book? What motivated you to write the book, and was there a specific goal in mind which you had when writing the book? And the second is that the Epidemic Diseases Act, which was passed in 1897, do you think it requires any new amendments? Thank you.
The last question is very easy to answer because I have written I'm just looking for it. Yeah. So 1.10, page number 44 in the book, new epidemic control and management law need of the hour. And it did get introduced in the parliament subsequently. So it addresses that question. Well, first question as to the process of writing the book, I never was interested in writing the book. I was just writing articles and op-eds in various places on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. As the situation was evolving of COVID in various areas, I was trying to capture it and write it. And then I thought at one place there should be a chronology where the person who reads it later will realize that was the situation where there was not even isolation wards available. And big isolation wards had to be temporarily set up in places like Mumbai or in other areas. So that had to be captured. And that's it. And later on, I thought, so just put it together into the form of the book. On the first question relating to families not admitting or going into a denial mode that somebody died of COVID, I think it's just not COVID. I think there are families today who probably would accept that there is mental depression. People are suffering from mental depression in their houses. There are people who would not admit that there is a person who died of cancer, or they could probably say who died of cancer, but initially when he's having it, they won't probably reveal it. Now, this is there in our psyche probably, in families, and lack of awareness. I think whatever it is, the basic point here is this is how the society has been built. Society, the response of government and governance to such a psyche is problematic because you cannot deliver the kind of government service that is available if you don't get that information. So I think we have to also think of this, that the trust between governments and communities and households has to increase much more. Now, this is a problem all over the world. This is a problem in our societies. And therefore, when I say that Odisha's success model is primarily around building community resilience into most of their projects, food distribution, women empowerment, handling the vaccination, improving the schools, improving the hospitals. Do you know that the women SHGs in Odisha, they distributed food, initially, if you remember, during the pandemic, the central advisory came that, you wash your hands and put that mask and all this thing. This was delivered through the common government's, channel of various functionaries. In Odisha, it was delivered faster than the government channel by only using women SHGs. Because they were available everywhere and women have, they took charge. The distribution of food grains or cooked food to destitutes who generally are provided food every day, but during that time, they could not move because, everywhere there was a lockdown. So again, the women SHGs did it. Now, these are innovations which Odisha did, and you can see here there is no government trace, it is community taking charge. And that is what we have realized as the strength and that is what is being done. It is not that it is only being done in Odisha. There were some doubts. It has been. I've seen in Kerala it has happened, but I've seen this is happening to some extent in tribal societies in Shillong in Sikkim, where I was posted there. But of a larger scale, I had never seen what is being done in Odisha, and that is what I have captured in the book. Not to say others have not.
Perhaps in the next one you can include all of those as well.
He wants the pan media.
Family people.
So at least in
So
the,
he will
in the article that he has
fund me.
offered
He
you
will
to
fund
write.
me the
Let's
resources.
make a beginning with the article first. Okay, I think when I got a call last week, whenever somebody asks me to either moderate a book launch or speak at a book launch, I never say no, because journalists like us are unlearning with the passage of time, because we hardly read. Okay? So this kind of forces me to read at least a book. So so when he said, and actually that day when he called, that day itself was the book by Dr. Bidhu Mohan. So that was just come out of it. I said, okay, I will read this. I will try to read this book. And I don't want to now hold back. I think we have had a very insightful and engaging discussion on this book, and that too on such a short notice. So I know that the due vote of thanks will be placed by the publisher, but I would still like to, on your behalf, thank Karthikeya, Dr. Vandana Prasad, Mr. Maya, and Dr. Debroy, who is not here. They could make it on such a short notice. And we did cover quite a lot of ground, not that everything has been said, and we can. I want to leave, so having kind of disagreed a bit with Dr. Debroy and having agreed with what Vandana said about the tonality of the book and why it should be treated in a little different way, I want to say a few things on that. I think there are three kinds of books we talk about in the process. One are called quickies. Okay, we don't take them seriously. Then the other are the academic work, where you go to the minutest detail, whether did you take the NWFS latest, or did you take the NSSO data of 2004-5, and what was the margin of error and all that. And then there is something that lies in between, which is quasi-academics, and which is actually the cup of tea for people like you and me, right? And there is absolutely a justifiable reason for such books, because those books bring ideas out with the minimum credible evidence that ought to be there to back up those ideas. Okay? So to that extent, I think one criticism of Dr. Debroy, I think you should incorporate if you get an opportunity to revise this, which is references are a must. Bibliography is a must, even if it was a academic book. I think that has to be there. So actually that justifies, even if you have a data set which is relating to 2004-5, if you actually care to put that bibliography, you would have put it to 2004-5 NSSO, which is incorporated in Navis Bhandari's 2010 article. It becomes clear. I think that criticism should be taken on board and incorporated if there is a reason. The other thing is a suggestion the publisher may consider. For books like these, when you're actually compiling articles that are written at different points in time, and you want to actually let them be as they are, because so that the reader can relate and visualize what is happening there, what you can do, you can have a qualifying postscript.
So it is there in brilliant pages. It's been written there.
No, I saw in this thing. I think, to some of the things where you are thinking that it requires an update or something is outdated or something has become past tense, like for example, the decriminalization issue came up, right? The postscript could have contained that, this happened, XYZ. That's a suggestion that many publishers do that. If you see Raghuram Rajan's book, What I Do, is written in that style, and it kind of made a very good read. So that's a suggestion. Thank you very much. I think all of you enjoyed. We don't want to hold you back. I can see you have missed a lot of action, Rajiv.
Oh, Rajiv, thank you so much.
But I can see Kanwasa is sitting there. Mr. Sinha has made it. Sweetbabu is there. All of you, from your busy schedule, you could make time. Now, may I request the publisher to place a formal vote of thanks.
But before that, I must thank the panelists, because it was really a short time. We're which they agreed to come and participate. And I'm sure they would have gone through the book. If they would have got more time to go through the book, then they would have come up with even a host of more informatives, which I would have addressed. So I realized that a second edition, updated version of the book is probably in order, and that would be done. Thank you.
So a lot of action really, but the suggestions are well taken. Although there is in the publisher's note or author's note, we have mentioned that these are the articles that are written in the past, and some where data maybe you might find data obsolete. Anyway,
I was suggesting chapter-wise post.
that suggestion is well taken, sir. Thank you very much, all of you. It's already 8:15, and I thank the panelists. Yes, it was a short notice, and you all managed to come. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Patnaik, for giving us the opportunity to do this book. I'm really happy. Thank you so much.